Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Through the Eyes of a Therapist podcast, season 7. This is episode 2. And on the podcast today, we have a returning guest who you might remember from a few seasons ago when we talked about motherhood. And I want to reintroduce you to Bianca. Before we have her talk, though, I want to remind you to please follow me on Instagram at Through the Eyes of a Therapist, or you can visit my website at www.clarityelpaso.com. Again, I'm Cristal Acosta, licensed professional counselor, and I'm here with another licensed professional counselor named Bianca. And so she's going to tell us a little bit about herself before we get started with today's episode about self-care and balancing work and family time as a therapist. So welcome, Bianca. Tell us about yourself.
Thank you. Hi, I am Bianca Balderrama. I have been licensed as a licensed professional counselor, fully licensed since, I believe it was 2019.
Oh, wow.
It's been a while. Yes. And I recently opened my own practice last year, and I've just been spending the year kind of growing that, Pearl Counseling, and in El Paso, Texas. And yeah, I'm just kind of enjoying that and really getting into what private practice looks like as a clinician and a family, a mom, all of that stuff, managing my family. Yeah. So I'm excited to talk about that.
Yes, I'm excited to talk about that with you too. I think that our journeys are pretty similar as far as like going from working at a place and then deciding to go into private practice and then sort of becoming moms at the same time-ish, sort of. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting for people to hear our perspectives and talk about that work-life balance in private practice. But also just as therapists, because therapists, I feel, are like a different breed of people in a career. So I think it'll be interesting to talk about, especially for people who are maybe curious about what therapists do with their time, or if you're a therapist in training, which I know some people who are therapists in training listen to this podcast. So I think it'll be interesting to kind of let them into that world and give them a heads up about what's coming up. So thanks for being on the podcast again. We're happy to have you back.
Thanks. Happy to be back.
The royal we. Me, but also like the audience, right?
The listeners, yes.
The listeners, yes.
And me, I'm a listener too.
Yay. Awesome. So yeah, season 7. We are going to talk about like different things in this podcast: family time, socializing, alone time, private practice, boundaries, things like that. So can you tell us a little bit about what you think about work-life balance now that you are a mom and you're in private practice? Like, what are some things you think people need to know about?
I keep talking about how nobody mentioned how exhausting it would be to like be a mom and be a business owner and, do all of these things and still maintain this practice and, hold space for other people and things like that. It's exhausting, but I think the one thing I'm learning the most is to kind of make sure that I'm keeping a really good handle on my basic self-care boundaries, like making sure I get enough sleep or I'm going to sleep at a decent hour and making sure that I'm drinking enough water and, staying in the sun every now and then, going outside.
Right.
Very simple things like that. But that's not always easy when you have a little, a small child like running around mommy, mommy, mommy all the time.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with that. I had this conversation with, I think it was like some associates or something, because I supervise people who are being licensed, right? Or becoming licensed. We're talking a little bit about self-care. And I use the example of like when I have to use the restroom in the middle of a session or like in between sessions, like I don't hold it. And for some reason, I mean, I excuse myself, I go to the restroom and then I come back. Because I think before I was like holding it forever.
Mhm.
And like even things like that, like going to the bathroom, drinking water, like you said, getting some sunlight, those basic activities, I think
Yeah.
could be easy to neglect.
Yeah.
When you're serving others, right? Like I know that there are teachers and doctors and nurses, right, that probably do the same thing. They're so busy throughout the whole day. And it's
Mhm.
just like they forget to eat or drink water or
Yeah.
go outside for a second. Yeah.
Yes. I think you brought up a great point. Like, even in session, when you have to use the bathroom, I used to be so afraid to, like, oh my gosh, I have to interrupt you. Like, I have to excuse myself. But that's also a boundary that I've started to really respect on, for myself. Because in the middle of session, it might not be the easiest thing if somebody's really upset or like grieving a loss or something for you to just like, excuse me, I have to go. So, one of the boundaries that I've made sure is that I'm always giving myself at least 2 to 3 minutes between sessions. And
Mhm.
that has kind of tend to make me a little bit later to like start the next session, but only by like 2 or 3 minutes. And I've really had good conversations with my clients who are always so wonderful and respectful, and letting them know that like I may be just a few minutes late, but it's only so that I can meet my needs. And then that way I'm all in for yours.
Right, exactly. So it's kind of like preventing those moments from
Mm,
happening in the first place, right? Where you're like,
yeah.
oh, great, in the middle of a session, have really dry
Hmm.
mouth. And then you're like, man, I really need to get up and go get water or tea or something.
Hmm. Yeah.
But if you give yourself a few minutes before session to just take care of it real quick, it's like you will be a little bit late, but
Hmm.
it's worth it because it's like investing in your own care, right? Like maintenance of the body. Like we're
Yeah, which is
human. We
we cannot invest in other people if we don't invest in ourselves. So
Yeah.
that's the most important thing I think of this
Mhm.
job, is to make sure that you don't neglect your self-care.
Right. Yeah, not neglecting your self-care. And I think um and that's whether you're doing private practice work or agency work, right?
Mhm.
Like I feel like it was a lot harder at an agency. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I think that there's like just more administrative pressure or
Mhm.
pressure from higher up, or like your clients are waiting in the waiting room and it's like they're kind of there.
Mhm.
So like I have to
Yeah.
preface that comment with like now I do virtual therapy almost 100% of the time. So
Mhm.
I feel like the pressure's not so high, I think. Um because people take time off from like work or school and then they show up to the clinic, right? But I think with telehealth, it's like easily accessible. Like you just log in from wherever you're at and like it's less of an inconvenience for the client. Not that it gives you an excuse to just do whatever you want, right?
Wear
But
no
I think
pants. Yeah.
right, yeah, yeah, definitely. But maintain some professionalism, but
Mhm.
still I think it makes it easier to meet your needs when you're kind of um like at home. Like I
Yeah.
work in my home office and
Yeah.
I have my kitchen and I can just go get water or whatever, right?
Mhm.
Like when you're at an agency, it's not like the comfort of your own home kind of thing.
Mhm.
But it makes me think of like boundaries too, right? Because if you're working from your home,
Mhm.
then those boundaries could get blurred. Does that ever happen to you?
Yeah, I think that like I don't like to work when people are in the house. Like if my child is home or my husband is home, I don't really like to, but I've had to for such a long time because my daughter only just started school. And so they would hear her sometimes, especially when she was a baby, they might hear like crying off in the distance or my dogs like barking.
Yes.
It could be a little bit of a boundary bushing, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
it is hard.
Yeah, like the noise in the background. I'm the same way. I would really prefer to work when people aren't home, right? Like husband or family members visiting or anything like
Mhm.
that, right? Like I just, yeah, the dog's barking. My dogs hang out with me in session. I have a little like squishmallow pillow that they lay down on. But sometimes if like somebody rings the doorbell or something and then they
Mhm.
go crazy barking, it's like, I'm so sorry, like apologizing for my dogs in the middle of session
Mhm.
sometimes. That happens.
Yeah. I think the boundaries of like family, right? Like that can be really hard when it comes to doing like telehealth because you can't just turn off the mom or the spouse part of you that is just in your home office. You know what I mean? Like anytime I hear something going on, there's a little part of me that just like, is everything okay? And then, okay, no, it's not for me. That's for them to deal with. You know what I mean? Like it's a little bit, it gets muddy sometimes. So that's why I don't like to work when people are home.
Yes. Yeah, I totally get it. Like if my husband's home taking care of my child and then my child's crying and screaming because I don't know, they have to share a
Mhm.
toy or something,
Yeah.
right? It's like you have this like dual attention. It's almost like, well, it's instinct too, right? Like your
Yeah.
kid's crying in the other room and you're like, "Oh," like your focus switches a little bit.
Mhm.
And then you kind of come back to, okay, wait, like I'm listening to the client right now. Like I can't,
Yeah.
they're fine. Like they have somebody watching them.
Mhm.
And so just kind of like continue doing what you're doing.
But I
I
think
totally
that's
get that.
also like a universal thing too, because if you're working in an agency, this was something I remember experiencing when I was working at an agency. We all have like smart devices, and most of us are wearing like watches that, will shoot a text message to it, and you could glance at it and see it. And there's always like this, you know, boundary that I'm very aware of for me where I have to not pay attention to that. So I try to put on the do not disturb, but sometimes, if somebody texts multiple times, like it's going to go through, especially if that's one of those important people. And it's hard. So whether you're doing it at home and whether you're doing it in an agency, like not virtually, I think there's always going to be that part of you that's like, because you are a part of a family, you are a part of a unit. You're not just the therapist that's sitting in front of this client. You're always going to be somebody else's someone. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. You might have something else to attend to
Hmm.
at any time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day, like, because my child also recently started school. So our kids, I think, started school at the same time,
Hmm.
like this fall, right? And so I was thinking about, like, what if I'm in session and let's say he gets sick or something, and
Hmm.
the nurse calls me, but I'm in session, right? And
Hmm.
then, like, I can't immediately answer the phone, but I need to pick him up from school or something. Like, how am I going to
Yeah.
let my clients know about the cancellations? And like,
Hmm.
specifically, I think for private practice, it's a little bit more, well, solo private practice, or if you're the biller, the scheduler, the
Yeah.
receptionist, the
Yeah.
therapist, right? Like you take on all those roles. Cause like at an agency, you could like go to the front desk or something and tell the receptionist, like, could you please cancel everybody?
Hmm.
I have to go pick up my kid. But then there's the element of the supervisor, right? Like, hey, let me ask you permission so I can go. Cause there's always like a
Hmm.
hierarchy. So that element
Yes.
is gone in kind of
Yeah.
solo-ish private practice, but you're the one who has to like tell your client something. Like, I'm not
Hmm.
going to show up or we got to reschedule. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like there's always that thing in the back of your head. And that's probably most working caregivers, right? But
Hmm.
when you're in the middle of a session, it could be a whole hour before you respond,
Yeah.
right?
Especially if it just started. So that could be a little bit nerve-wracking. And I think that's a that's a hugely I think something that's like very anxiety inducing for any mom, like you said, any parent that's in this role where they have to just stop working to go tend to their child, right? But
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I would probably be a lot more nervous or have a lot more guilt about it if I was working in an agency and I was doing in person, because what if that client drove from like clear across town to come see me, and
Right.
then I would feel like, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry you had to drive like 40 minutes to get here and I'm canceling on you," you know? So It
Yes.
does make me feel very grateful for the virtual experience, but it is also, I think, going back to the self-care part, for me, I could do in person if I really wanted to. But
Mhm.
at this point, in order to meet my needs, I have to meet my family's needs. And what's best for me and my family right now is only offering virtual. So that's a big part of why I'm doing the virtual experience.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. I think about that sometimes too. Like, I know that my goal is to open like a physical location with all
Mhm.
of that stuff, right? And I think nobody knows what all that stuff is, but we'll get into that in another episode. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, like having a really cool physical location, but then at the same time, it comes with more responsibility. You probably have to give more energy, more
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
And so virtual really does, I feel, I agree with you, like help with the balance of being able to stay home, like being available for pickup at school, right? Or
Yeah.
like drop off. Um, if the nurse does call, like, okay, maybe there will be some times where I'm not in session.
Mhm.
And I can choose my days that I'm going to take off. Like today is a Friday. I typically don't work on Fridays. And so if it happens to be a Friday or a weekday, we can do like doctor's appointments or,
Mhm.
like just be available to do other things that maybe
Yeah.
when you work for someone or within a group practice or an agency, there's not that much freedom and control, right? Like over your
Yeah.
schedule and what that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that for me, in order to be able to do this job effectively, to be able to be fully present for my clients, even virtually, I had to make sure that I was not working in certain settings. And this is what motivated me to open up my own practice so that, I wasn't necessarily not in control of my schedule at the last place that I worked at. It was really great and they were super supportive there and it was wonderful. But I just kind of wanted to not have to be limited on how much I worked, or I didn't want to have to be meet a minimum amount. So I wanted it to be okay. Like if I needed to take a week off or if I needed to, I don't know, just reduce the amount of hours or work 2 hours a day. You know what I mean? Like it's always something that I ethically I'm still going to be available to my clients because I mean, hello, we have to when we enter
Right.
into this relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still able to feel like I can have boundaries, but then also be more available to my clients if that makes sense. Like I never used to offer like check-in calls on the weekends or even like extra appointments. If I didn't have any openings, it was like, nope, I'm not opening anything else in the schedule. I can't do it. I won't do it because I
Mm-hmm.
just didn't want to have to go all the way down to like a physical location to work for an hour on a day off or something. But now I can
Right.
totally do that if necessary. If I have a
Yeah.
suicidal client who needs more frequent sessions for that week, if we have to do that just to meet their safety plan, or if I have to call and check in on them because I know that this is going on, then it's something that doesn't feel like it's completely pulling me away from my family?
Right. It doesn't feel like you're doing extra or too
Yeah.
much or like, oh, like I'm
Mhm.
already burned out at my cap, right? And then now I
Mhm.
have to respond to these extra things. And I think also like in group agency work, you have some administrative time, and I'm putting that in like air quotes, right? Because
Yeah.
you have maybe an hour or two like to complete everything while you're still kind of on the clock, right? Like getting paid for it. But realistically, I feel like sometimes I would end up staying like longer
Mhm.
or taking extra time here and there between clients or during a cancellation. I would
Mhm.
catch up on paperwork. So realistically, we need more time to do, check-in calls or checking on that client who's in crisis or CPS reports or different
Yes.
things like that, right? And those can
Mhm.
take a really long time, especially if you use the hotline.
Oh my
um,
gosh, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, we're mandated reporters, so it's not like, "Oh, I'll leave that for, like, next week." Like, no, you have to
Yeah.
report that in, like,
Right.
48 hours
Right. Or less.
or less, yeah, and it's like, "Ni modo, pues, you're gonna have to do
Yeah.
it," you know?
Yep.
So, yeah, I think it's harder to meet those best practice sort of, like, requirements and even some of the legal hard requirements, right? Like, when you're
Mhm.
working somewhere else or you have, like, a quota or, like, expectations that are not realistic and that you didn't set for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of agencies can have, like, minimum hours that you have to put in for the week, and sometimes that's not realistic because you can't force a client to show up, you know? And they could
Mhm.
legitimately have emergencies that you can't control, that they can't even control, you know? So,
Yeah.
it's not it was it was frustrating, but I really do appreciate those agencies that don't push, like, super unrealistic goals on you, you know?
Yeah. Yes, and I think that has to do with, like, if they know what it's like to be a
Mhm.
therapist day in, day out, seeing clients over and over, right?
Yeah.
And if they're not therapists themselves or, I think that's when we can start running into problems like that. So, I just
Yeah.
think it's interesting, right, that we've both had both experiences, like working
Mhm.
for someone or for different people or agencies, and then now working for ourselves. And sometimes I think, right, like if I were to go back to an agency or work for someone else or become a supervisor somewhere, right, like I wouldn't be available for pickups or sick time
Yeah.
or, um, if my kid gets out at like close to 2:30 one time we went to, like, the new museum here in El Paso, and it
Mhm.
closed at, like, 7 p.m., and I was like, my schedule before was, like, 10 to 6, and, like,
Me
how would I ever
too.
have been able to do that, right? Like, I would have had to ask for
Yes.
time off and
Yeah.
all of that, so
Yeah, when I was an intern, what associates are now, back then we called them interns. I remember working like I think it was 12 to 8, 12 to 8
oh,
PM.
wow.
And there were times where I didn't get home until like 9:30 at night because I lived so far away or I had to catch up on notes. And like it was just so exhausting, which is why I always emphasize the importance. What you were saying before, like you said that a lot of associates or therapists in training are listening to this podcast. Just because you are novice doesn't mean that you don't have the power to set your own boundaries, you know? Like, I didn't
Oh,
think I
absolutely.
could say, "I can't work that late. That's too late for me." But I didn't speak up. I didn't say anything, and then I feel like I was taken advantage of because I couldn't speak up, you know? I didn't have that voice for myself, and
Yeah.
now that's not a problem.
Yeah, you're like, "Now I just say."
Not anymore.
Right. Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And I think I've talked about this on a different podcast before and how beginning counselors are really in that power dynamic, right? Where they're coming
Mhm.
in and they're new and so they feel like either they have to pay their dues or prove themselves and also the agency as a hierarchy is perpetuating that, like,
Yep.
oppressive idea, right? Like, "Oh, well,
Yeah.
they're new, so we can just schedule them for Christmas Eve
Yeah.
because they're the new
Yeah.
ones or something,"
Yeah.
right? And if you celebrate that or whatever, right? But,
Mhm.
um, also, like, with pay and time off and benefits and stuff like that, I think it's important for
Yes.
associates or interns or even student interns, right, to be aware of
Yeah.
their rights and their boundaries and, like, advocate for themselves. And, I think this goes into supervision a little bit, right? Like, um, I'm an LPC supervisor, and I'm always telling my associates, like, make sure you're getting paid fairly. Make sure you use your
Mhm.
PTO. Make sure that if you are sick, like, you don't work. Because I
Yeah.
remember doing all of those things, not using my
Mhm.
PTO, working when I was sick, working through things, or like leaving late from agencies. And then what ended up happening? With me, at least, it was like,
Mhm.
peace out, we can replace you. Like,
Oh my gosh.
it's terrible. So I'm like, no, like, you're a human first. And if you don't take care of that part of yourself, then nobody's going to be like, hey, you need to go hydrate, or hey, have you gone to the
Yeah.
bathroom today? Like, have you eaten? Like, no, I never heard that once
Right.
from other
Yeah.
people. So you have to build that skill for yourself, you know?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And in the state of Texas, there are so many agencies that because you can't, as an associate, you cannot bill a lot of insurances, which seems to be changing because I know there is supervisory billing for some insurance companies now,
Mm-hmm.
but not all
Yeah,
of
for a
them. So
couple.
there's so many people that are working for free. I had an unpaid internship and really only got paid if the client I had was able to pay anything, and in most instances, they couldn't. So sometimes I was getting paid like $80 for 2 weeks of work or less, and it was like coffee money, and I don't even drink coffee, so it's not fair.
You're like, it would just like disintegrate from my
Yeah,
hands right when I would grab it. Yeah,
exactly.
definitely. I know that recently UTEP, they started to offer like a stipend for certain sites, which is really nice. Yeah, it's
Nice.
so cool. I'm glad that they do. I just remember when I was in graduate school, they were like, you can't work. Like, if you're in the full-time program, like,
I remember
not
that too.
allowed,
Mhm.
I'm like, oh my God. So I worked part-time because I had to.
Yeah.
I was a graduate assistant and also a fitness instructor
Mhm.
at NMSU, but like that was rough, man, because you're like at your site 40 hours a week. At least for us, it was like double the
Mhm.
time, right? So
Mhm.
we had to finish a whole internship in just one semester. And so we basically were there 40 hours a week, and then I had to like go to work and then do all the assignments for like all the classes that I had. It was wild. Like
Yikes.
they're just like, burnout, it's fine. Like,
They're
get used
starting
to
you
it.
off with the burnout. Like, don't worry about
Exactly.
self-care, just get in the field. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And I
No,
think
it
that there are
wasn't
a
you
lot of
it wasn't like that
students
at
who,
UTEP. I
when you
think
were there, right?
when I was there, they told us, we could work if we needed to, but it might be problematic once we got to like practicum and supervision classes because that's where we had to be available for the most part during the day for a lot of these agencies that were only open during the
Right.
day. And that was
Yes.
hard. I mean, I was very privileged enough to not have to work when I was in graduate school. So
Mhm.
I didn't have that issue. But even then, like, I remember at the site that I worked at, they were they were pretty, I think my supervisor at the time was pretty invested in making sure that we were not burning ourselves out. Um, and then I think I only worked like maybe 15 to 20 hours there a week because we didn't really have to do more then. But when I
Yeah.
graduated and had that postgraduate internship, that's, I think, where I felt the most intense burnout of my career so far, to the point where I felt like I didn't know if I was going to want to do this again. I really considered leaving the profession, and then I
Wow.
moved to another place and I was like, "Oh, okay, this is good. I can do
Okay.
this now." Yeah.
So that's what remedied it for you, is like having
Yes.
different experience versus
A
just staying there and being
corrective.
like
Yeah.
a corrective experience, right?
Mhm.
Versus like, I'm just gonna stay here and this is how it is. So screw this. Like, I'm not gonna do
Yeah.
it again. Well, thankfully
Yeah.
you did move because we need good therapists in our community. And I think that you're
Agreed.
one of them.
Thank
I
you.
think it's important, right? Like for people hearing this, no matter who you are, whether you're a client or you're a therapist, like remembering that I don't think any job is worth your mental well being. I think that's too
Mhm.
expensive. I
Yeah.
remember telling myself early on that I would never sell my soul ever again, because a place can pay you really well, um,
Mhm.
but the work is so intense, or your supervisor sucks or something, right? And it's just
Yeah.
like, oh, this just is not worth it. Like, absolutely not. So, um, having a change of scenery and putting those boundaries is important for sure.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think somebody once told me early on in my career, like that you could easily make like $100,000 a year in this career. And then when they pointed out the person that was doing it, I was like, they were working over 40 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
And they just looked ragged, like they were so exhausted. And then I had a conversation with that person a few years later, and they were like, absolutely not worth it. Absolutely not worth it. Because when they moved to their own practice and they opened up their own business, they were easily able to make a very decent, comfortable amount of money working less amount of hours. And it's
Yeah.
totally possible. There can be those boundaries on your time, and you can still make what you need to make. And I think it's really important that you're kind of really emphasizing that with your supervisees, because their time is super valuable. And even if they are freshly graduated, they have master's degrees. Like,
Exactly.
they are valuable. And
Yes.
there's no denying that. There's no argument there.
Yeah, for sure. When you were describing that person who was making over 100K, I was like, they've got to be
They
working
were
like a lot
exhausted.
because it
Yes.
therapists don't get reimbursed at the same rate that medical
No,
professionals do, but we
no.
spend a lot more time with an
Mhm.
individual person or with a family, right? Which
Yeah.
I don't think is fair. I know that recently some sort of parity act was passed. I don't have all the details on it, so I don't want to talk about it too much. But I'm
Okay.
hoping
I'll
that
look it up.
something like that will help us get reimbursed a little bit more and increase access at the same time for people. But I imagined like grad school Barbie. Have you ever looked that up? You should Google it.
No, but I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, grad school Barbie's all like burned out, all like raccoon eyes and like her hair's all crazy. Like it's pretty funny. So like, yeah, you're a rich therapist, but you look like grad school Barbie. Like
Yes,
we don't want that.
exactly. And I think that's another boundary for me, like making sure that I'm not this is not I don't do this for the money. I mean, I don't think any of us do, because we don't really get paid like that much, you know what I mean? For the most part.
Hmm.
But I don't ever want to be driven by the financial aspect of this. It is nice, I won't lie, being able to make double what I've been making now, working the same amount of hours, being in my own practice, doing my own billing, being a solo practitioner, all of that stuff. It is really
Yeah.
nice.
Hmm.
But it is also never going to be worth, like you said, my mental health. It's never going to, that's way too costly. It's too much of a price, because it's not only going to affect me, it's going to affect my child, it's going to affect my spouse, my family.
Right. I have one more question before we go. I wanted to know how you handle like boundaries with family. Maybe like the other way around, right? Like if
Mhm.
like family starts to impede upon your work or their relationships or like social life relationships, right? Like start to affect the way that you're working. Like how do you handle that?
Um, that's a good question. I think it's easier to like socializing, right? Because this career is so unique in that I feel like I've made a lot more friends who are therapists because I'm a therapist. And
Mm-hmm.
so most of my friends are in the field, they're in the business, and they really get it, like
Mm-hmm.
I have a very close friend who's a therapist, and I've noticed throughout our progress, because we met in grad school and we were interns together. And throughout the course of our relationship, I've kind of noticed that we've started to ask each other for consent without really asking each other for consent. Like, she'll kind of say something like, "Hey, are you in the headspace to hear me rant about this?" Or, like I'll drop something and tell her, like, just read this when you have a chance, when you're in it. And there's no like expectation that she has to respond immediately, and vice versa. So I feel like just gravitating towards those people who are naturally inclined to respect boundaries has been a big thing for me. But when it comes to family, that one is interesting, because I really had to learn that I was not good with boundaries when it came to my family back then. I would just drop whatever I was doing and go meet their needs, or I'd feel guilty. I've worked a lot of for many years with my own therapist to make sure that I'm really respecting my boundaries when it comes to my family. But I think the biggest thing is just like not trying to fix their problems, because they're perfectly capable of handling it on their own. Unless they ask, then I will help. But I stopped inserting myself into it. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like,
mhm.
if I have a family member kind of saying like, oh, this is going on and blah 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 blah, and I don't know what to do, I stop saying, well, I can, insert
Yeah, I can refer
helpful
you,
thing
or
here.
I can help with
Yeah,
this, or I could send you this,
yeah,
or yeah.
exactly. So I just kind of wait now to be asked. And I think my family has been really respectful about picking up on that. And they've been good, they've been really awesome about it. And I don't think I have any complaints about that in any way, because it's not always easy. I mean, I think that's the more privileged part of my family dynamic, because it's
Mhm,
not always
mhm.
easy. Some people don't have it that way. And some people will continue to
True.
um, ask and ask and ask and
Mhm.
not really understand that there's a line.
Yeah, like they don't respect people's boundaries. It does depend on the family.
Mhm.
Um, but I think we can't control them, right? We can only control ourselves. So like if we can set some sort of, no matter to what extent it might be, right? Like sometimes a lot of times I don't go to family parties or things like that, especially if I had a hard day of
Yeah,
sessions or my brain is just fried. Um, why am I going to be there with cara de caca?
exactly.
Right? And then like they're going to be like, why'd you even come? Like you should just stayed
Yeah.
home. Like,
Mhm.
um, so yeah, I think it just takes practice setting those boundaries. Do you ever, and this is something that people ask, I think associates have asked me this and students have asked me this during the internship like classes.
Mhm.
I want to get your take on this. And I think this will be my last question because I know that we're already gonna run over our time. But um,
Okay.
when you are socializing, let's say you're at a party or you're like at some networking event, or not networking, that doesn't count because it has to do with your job. So like,
Okay.
no, let's leave that out. Let's say it's like a social
Social
thing.
event.
Yeah,
Okay.
social event. Somebody comes up to you that you don't really know, but they want to get to know you. Maybe you're sitting at the same table or something, like a wedding, right? Like you don't know them, but
Mhm.
they ask you questions or something or whatever. What do you do when they ask you, like, what do you do for a living?
Oh, I mean, I tell them because, first of all, I'm really proud of what I do. I think
Okay.
it's a beautiful thing. The therapeutic relationship has been the most healing relationship of my entire life, because it's taught
Yeah.
me what a good relationship is supposed to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's helped me kind of model a lot of that kind of relationship to my family members and myself specifically. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm really proud of it. So I do, I do share with people what I do. Most of the time
Yeah.
people just assume, because I'll just say I'm a therapist, and they'll just assume it's like speech therapy or occupational
Or
therapy.
physical therapy or something.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I think that is when I will just kind of gauge whether or not they're going to be one of those people that's like, well, what is wrong with me if this is happening? You know what I mean? So I just like,
Yes.
I might clarify if they're not like that, if they're not, a little, well, I mean, boundary crossing.
Right. And of course, I don't think they do it out of malice. I
Yeah,
think
I don't
they
think so
just
either.
do it because
It's
it's just
fascinating.
like a natural
Hmm.
inclination to be like, "Oh, well, I have this issue."
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if I've ever had to set like a hard boundary like that. Like, I'm not able to talk to you about this, but
Hmm.
I'm hoping you find a therapist or something. Like, I've never really
Yeah.
had to do. I think I would if I really had to. Like, that person was talking my ear off, but
Yeah.
I think a quick change of subject is helpful. or like, oh, like, did you try this? Or like, oh, what do you do for a living? Like,
Mhm. Yes.
I don't I don't want to talk about really like what I do. What I made
Mhm.
this mistake one time. I don't know if it was my mistake or that person just of course didn't have boundaries. It was a combination of
Mhm.
both things. I also didn't set the boundary like I should have, but I was getting a massage once. Okay. And the
Mhm.
massage therapist was like massaging my back. She's like, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a therapist." So she's like, "Oh, like a mental health therapist?" I'm like, "Yeah." And she proceeded to tell me like her whole like trauma story, whatever. And I was like laying there, like helpless. Like, what am I supposed to do at that
Completely
point?
vulnerable. Oh my
Yes.
god.
And this person is
Yeah.
like, like touching my body, like so that they can massage me. And like, I was just like, oh my God, like this was the
Oh
worst.
man.
I didn't know what to do. So I just like let it happen kind of thing. Um and was like, okay, like next time if I'm in this situation, I'm just going to say like specifically with massage therapists or when I'm in a position where I know I can't escape easily, I'm going to
Yeah.
be like, I work in social services or oh, I work from home. Oh,
Yeah.
what do you do from home? Oh, it's like I make phone calls and talk to people.
Mhm.
Which is sort of true. I'm not lying, but it's just
Yeah.
not the complete truth.
Well, now that I've never had to like actually, no, that's a lie. I have had to tell someone. I had a hairdresser who would get like really
Oh.
like personal, like
Yeah.
what do you think is going on with this? What do you think is going on with that? So I would always just say, um I could tell you if I was your therapist, but I can't be your therapist because this is a dual relationship and that's not ethical. And, just kind of make a joke out of it, which it's not a joke because that's absolutely the truth, but just make it
Right.
a little bit more art, like light and lighthearted. And,
Yeah.
you know, he laughed it off and that's kind of how it ended. And that was fine. But then he also did one time ask if he could send a family member to me. And I was like, no, I don't see friends or family of people that I know. And that's
Yeah.
that's it,
And that's a good
basically.
boundary to have
Hmm.
for sure. Um,
Yeah.
I always say that this is my last question. This is a comment I just want to make. I want to go back to the grad school Barbie thing
Okay.
because I think like you could make good money without burning yourself out. So
Yeah,
I'm not taking it
absolutely.
back completely, but I think if
Mhm.
you are not careful with boundaries or your
Yes,
pricing or the
absolutely.
niche or like different things, if you don't diversify or like, I don't know, it just depends on your business model, right? But
Mhm.
you could work and make into six figures if you manage things appropriately without burning out. But
Yes,
there are
absolutely.
people who, like you described, right, where they will just see client after client after client after client, and they're making six figures, but they have turned into grad school Barbie. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
clarify. I just don't
Yeah,
want you
good
to feel like,
clarification.
oh man, I gotta burn out to make six figures. Like, no, not necessarily. You
No,
just
it's
gotta.
totally possible.
It's possible. Yeah.
Mhm.
So anyway, just want to say that. Are there any other things that you think we need to mention in this episode or about this topic before we go?
I think one last thing, just to
Yes.
kind of take the pressure off of people, because I know a lot of your listeners are not therapists, and I send a lot of my clients your way to listen to the podcast because it has been helpful and they've really learned a lot about just therapy in general because of it. And so I want to make sure that people who are listening, whether you're a therapist or not, understand that just because we're sitting here talking about self care and the importance of it doesn't mean we're pros at it. Like there are absolutely times in my life where I struggle more than in other times, and
Mm-hmm.
I just don't want people to feel like, oh, just because they have this degree, they're perfect at it, or they're getting it right. Absolutely not. We are
Oh,
not.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, sometimes it's like self-care mis nalgas. Like, are you kidding me? Like,
Exactly.
that ain't gonna happen.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, or if you're listening and you're like, man, those people seem really overwhelmed. Well, but we are trained and practice often how to take care of
Mhm.
that overwhelm. So don't feel
Yeah.
like, now I can't share with my therapist. No, you absolutely should. That's our job,
Yes,
right?
absolutely. And one of the things that I emphasize to my clients all the time is that it's very important to have a bag full of self-care tricks, because one
Mm-hmm.
day, you know, you might not be able to get a full night's rest. And so you're going to need to rely on something else. And one day you might just not feel like reading a book. And so you're going to want to do something else. And another day, it could be raining outside, so you can't go out for that walk. You know what I mean? Like, you have
Mhm.
to have a varied amount of things that you can just pull out of that bag at any given moment.
Yeah, absolutely. What is your self-care indulgence? That's my last I promise that's my last
Okay.
question. I'm sorry, but like, what is the thing that you're like, I must do this, or this is the best thing for my mental health?
For my mental health, it's got to be video games. I really
Oh,
love like sitting down and playing a cozy video game on my Switch. I used to be like watching, trashy reality TV shows like Love Island. Gosh, I love that show. But
that's funny.
it's
Yeah.
both, I think it's probably like the Real Housewives series. Like, it's so bad, but it's so good,
Yeah.
all of that
Yes.
stuff.
Trash
Um,
TV for sure, where you
mhm.
absolutely don't have to think. I also love
Yes.
watching like QVC, or like
Yes.
HSN, like where they just present
Yeah.
products, because it feels like you're
Mhm.
shopping, but you've never left the house.
Yeah.
It's like window
Technically,
shopping.
that's exactly what you're doing. You are shopping
Right?
if you purchase anything.
Right,
But
right.
yeah.
Yeah. I had to get rid of that channel though, just FYI, because I'm, I guess, too easy to convince to buy things. Um,
You're the target audience.
yeah, I am. And yeah, the Switch is definitely, I love Animal Crossing a lot. So that's
Yes.
really helpful for me to just
Yes.
kind of
Animal Crossing,
disconnect.
just the music alone is so
I know.
chill, so relaxing. I love it. I do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just like, let me be really intent on this one meaningless goal, like collecting 3 kinds of fish, like,
Exactly.
or moving all
It
my
has to
trees
be
to the other
raining.
side. Oh, it has to be
Yes.
raining. I heard that rain fishing's different in the game than like
Yeah,
regular
because
fishing.
you'll collect special kinds of fish. There's a lot of fish that only come out when it's raining.
What?
Mhm.
I've been
Get
playing for
on
almost
it.
a year and I cannot believe that I didn't
Yes,
know
only
that.
when it's raining. I think there's this special fish that
Oh,
only comes out when it's raining. I forget what it's called though. And then I
yeah.
think the anglerfish is one that might only come out when it's raining. I could be wrong about that.
Oh, I
Yeah.
was so happy I caught a shark. Like those are kind of hard to catch, so I finally
Because
caught a
those only
shark.
come out like in the summer months, right? Like June and July, I think.
Yeah, and if you don't push the button right at the right time, like
Yep.
that's it. They're gone for like
Yep.
a few hours or a day or so, and I'm like, ah.
Yes.
So yeah, anyway.
Yeah, so this
Um
conversation alone is proof that we indulge.
yes, yes, absolutely. And spicy chips, but we won't get into that. So
Yeah.
anyways,
Yeah.
yeah. How can people reach you? Like if they heard you and they're like, I want to make an appointment with Bianca. Like how do they get a hold of you?
So you can find me on psychologytoday.com. I am there under Bianca Balderrama, or you can reach me at 915-861-5065.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bianca, for having this conversation with me about work-life balance and self-care and therapy and stuff. I appreciate it.
Of
And I
course.
hope you can come
Thank you.
back onto the podcast sometime.
I would be honored.
Awesome. So again, please follow us or me or, the royal we on Instagram at Through the Eyes of a Therapist. You can also find me on TikTok. I change my username pretty often, but right now it's My Counselor Life. Or you can just find me at Cristal the Counselor. And yeah, if you need anything else, you can also go to my website, clarityelpaso.com, and you'll find all the other things there that you might need to know about me, or if you want to make an appointment. But thank you again, Bianca, and we hope to see you for the next episode, everybody. Thanks for listening to Through the Eyes of a Therapist.
Thanks.